All right, so let us pick up with the problem of universals that we were talking about last time. Any questions to start off with about where we were? We were looking at whether truths that make apparent reference to abstract universals can be paraphrased wholly in terms of reference to concrete entities. And we found that there was some cases that appeared problematic for the concretist or nominalist philosopher who says we can translate all of these apparent references into concrete references. At first, things seemed to go well for the nominalist. He could say that redness is a color, can be rephrased as all red things are colored things, and that dragonhood is never exemplified, can be translated as there are never any dragons, that catness is exemplified by Garfield, can be translated simply as Garfield is a cat. But then when we looked at examples like honesty is a virtue, things got messier for the nominalist. And finally, an example like some shapes are never exemplified seemed really difficult for the nominalist to deal with without introducing some very suspicious terminology that seemed to bring in abstract entities or a very unparsimonious approach to the universe, like imagining the many worlds theory of possibility. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I just didn't catch this last class, but when you were talking about dragonness, specifically.
Dragonhood,
yeah. Yeah, dragonhood.
I mean, dragonness is okay, but it's just not sort of standard anymore.
Yeah, okay, so you said dragonhood is not exemplified, and then the...
Those are all called nominalizations, by the way. So when you nominalize a noun, you turn it into a name of from a concrete to an abstract. Yeah. So, but there are some, usually it's NESS, but then there are like, that's a suffix for nominalizing nouns into abstract, concrete nouns into abstract names. But some of them are irregular, like hood, like brotherhood and dragonhood. We wouldn't say dragonness or brotherness or something we'd say.
So when you said the nominalist would say that, therefore, would just say that, in order, you can paraphrase that as, there are never any dragons?
Well, if the claim was dragonhood is never exemplified.
Okay, it was never exemplified.
Well, that's one example. The other example is there are currently, dragonhood is currently unexemplified, and that would be there are currently no dragons. Yeah,
okay.
right.
I thought,
Okay.
I was just wondering, because I didn't know if you just, like, if it was, like, say, like if someone's going to nominalize, like, a false statement about dragons, does that mean that if you're going to, that the nominalist would then assume that there are never any of these, like, there are never any dragons? And that's what I was confused about.
Is it clarified now?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, so and then you have other, like, irregular endings, like ITY is an nominalizing suffix also, like unicornicity, the quality that all unicorns share, rather than unicornness or unicornhood, like cananinity, felininity, unicornicity, so triangularity. So you start out with an adjective or noun triangle, and you can turn it into an abstract name by adding the suffix. ITY, hood, ness.
So it becomes a verb then, right?
No, it's not a verb. No. A verb is like run or something.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of the ITY suffix as becoming a verb.
No, not a verb. There's an ILY suffix which turns verbs into adverbs, but I don't know, maybe it's like quick into quickly.
So we just talking about gerunds?
Hmm?
Like making one word that has one property into another property?
Well, you can turn one grammatical form into another by adding a certain suffix, in this case, to the original form. That's all I'm talking about. Like turn adjectives into names of abstractions by nominalizing them, which you do by adding a suffix like NESS or ITY or HOOD or whatever, right? So you turn dog into dogness. Right? So dog refers to concrete things, but dogness refers to abstract things. That's all I'm saying. Very simple. Yeah, so different theories then were proposed. A lot of these in the Middle Ages, when the problem of universals was like the hot topic of the time. So one view, which really wasn't held by anybody really in the Middle Ages, was Plato's view, because they very much followed Aristotle in the Middle Ages.
Anyone knows Aristotle?
This is extreme realism, which says that universals are eternal objects.
So does this mean like the idea of catness is an eternal idea?
It's an eternal entity. Yeah,
It's
it's an eternal like form or quality or something. Plato thought of it as a form, whatever that is, like a structure or pattern, essence or something. That all things of that type are modeled after or partake of that essence. So like the form of justice is something that any just thing represents or copies or resembles or something.
Gotcha.
That's what Plato thought, yeah.
So are these things universal because they can exist in propositions?
Why are they universal? Because they can be shared by many things.
Okay. I mean, are they eternal?
Eternal, yeah. They exist outside of space and time eternally, necessarily, unchangeably.
And they can't have causal relations?
They don't change, they don't evolve, they can't be moved, they can't be touched, they can't be smelled, right? But things in our world reflect them in some kind of way. Right. So if you have like an essence of justice, then any earthly act which is just reflects that essence of justice, according to Plato. And a lot of times it was held that you couldn't really get the pure form on the earthly plane. But like Diogenes, remember I talked about, he was this wandering around with a lamp saying, "I can't find an honest man." I'm looking around. So yeah, honesty itself is something that's reflected in life, but you never really get the pure thing. Or like a circle exists in geometry, but you never see like a perfect circle. They're all bumpy. Under a microscope, anything that's circular turns out to be very bumpy, right? Only roughly is circular, right? To a first approximation, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that was Plato's. Yeah, so universals are eternal objects. So this would say then that dogness is an eternal form. So even before dogs existed, there was the form of dogness. Maybe God looked at that form and then created dogs. Something like that. So in Latin, I like to always give you a little bit of the history here. This is described as the universals are prior to things, universalia ante rem, which means universals come before things.
Okay. So is this like almost playing into like the theology of like God made man
Yeah.
in his own image?
Yeah,
We could
sure.
relate to, like,
Yeah.
the image with form.
Definitely is tied up with Plato influenced Christianity a lot. Greek philosophy in general influenced the early theologians of the church. Universalia come ante rem. They're before. Ante means before. Rem are things. Universalia are universals. So universals are prior to things. Universals are eternal. Things are fleeting. And universals are the primary beings. And things in the world are more secondary. They derive their essence or quality from these abstract eternal qualities or forms. So that was a Platonic view. They say no one in the Middle Ages actually ever held that view, I don't think. Though Plato did.
So there's a juxtaposition between Plato's being in forms and then Aristotle's.
Yeah, Aristotle's, yeah. And they follow Aristotle much more in the Middle Ages. The closest they come was, there was some people called ultra-realists, but even they were sort of Aristotelians, broadly speaking, but they were more Platonic than others. One of them was William of Champeaux. William said that there's a single essence that is wholly present in each instance of a universal, so that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, for example, according to William of Champeaux, all have the very same essence of manhood. They literally have the same essence. So he was ridiculed for this because people argued that, well, what this show, if you're right, then Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are all the same man, and that seems wrong. They're different men, right? So how could they have exactly the very same essence? They may share some properties, but there's still some differentiating essence. So their entire essence can't be the same.
So the entire essence does not rest upon manhood, but again something.
This must be some other stuff,
Okay. There's like a higher essence that must be true.
higher, lower, whatever, something else that must apply to them to differentiate them. So their existence doesn't entirely depend just on the universal. Yeah.
So does, would the universals have to be manifested in order for them to?
Not for Plato.
Okay.
Yeah, for Plato, there could be unmanifested ones, like unicorn, unicornicity.
Can you just distinguish the difference between Aristotle and Plato?
Yeah, we're getting to him next. So.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, so, yeah, so you have this kind of view. Then you have moderate realism, that's Aristotle. So an example of somebody who held this was Duns Scotus in the Middle Ages. So this says universals are in things. So they're immanent, they're in the world. They're not outside of nature. They're in the things themselves. Catness is in cats. Universalia in rerum. Universals are in the things.
Is that rerum?
Yeah, R-E-R-U-M. It's like, this means things. So re is the operative root there. which we've encountered before, right? Like de re means of the things, as opposed to de dicto, which was of the propositions. Yeah.
You got rid of all the cats in the world, and in this system with the form of catness, would that just cease to exist?
Yeah.
If it's in the world?
Yeah.
So it's contingent upon something existing that has that
Yes.
universal.
Yeah. Has that quality or form. Yeah, whereas for Plato, there could be forms that are never found in the natural world, like maybe honesty or integrity. Right.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Right, so that's the moderate realism. And then you have conceptualism. For example, as held by William of Ockham. This is universals are in the intellect, universalia in intellectu. Universals are in the mind. So this views universals as ideas or concepts or mental images or something. So dogness could just be like our mental image of a dog or a concept of a dog.
So for William of Ockham, could someone be mistaken about a universal? Or is it purely like, or are they arbitrary? There's such a subjective, I guess.
Yeah, is it contingent on societal standards or the individual?
I guess there could be different versions of right of this view. You could have your individual concept and sort of the generally accepted concept. So, which one's better for the conceptualist? Right. It seems like you'd want to have some kind of idea of a generally accepted consensus concept. Otherwise, it's hard to see how you can communicate with
Right.
other people.
Schrodinger's box. It just reminds me of Schrodinger's box.
Yeah, but it seems like we do communicate, at least to some extent, right? It's difficult, but we do, so we must have some common ideas, and you would want to be able to talk about those, about the common things, in virtue of which we can communicate, because without any common ideas, we couldn't communicate at all. It'd be like trying to communicate with, like, a worm or something, right? His ideas are totally different than yours. Right? It's really difficult to communicate with a worm about anything, or for him to communicate with you. His things, right? Seems like you need a common basis to be able to set up like translation manual. Yeah. All right, so you have these. These are some of the main views. There was also what's called, how do I say, be called nominalism. Conceptualism can be regarded as a form of nominalism, but there's a stricter form of nominalism that was first put forward by Rosselin. Rosselin said that universals are that which is predicated of many, and what is predicated of many are sounds, which are corporeal objects, like air vibrations, so on. They didn't really have too many writing implements and paper during the Middle Ages. There was like one shelf of books, like, you know, like all of France or something, right? So they had very few manuscripts. So people mainly memorized things and communicated by word of mouth. So he tended to think of universals in terms of the spoken word rather than the written word. But for that reason, this form of nominalism would basically hold that that signs of some sort, whether verbal or inscribed, if you carry it over to writing, are the universals. So what's predicated of many is not an abstract catness, but rather the word cat or the sound cat.
So that is the universal?
That is the universal, because there are many objects of which that sound cat can be said, namely Garfield, Morris, and Felix, and so on.
So for Rosalind, are universals restricted by language?
Yeah, universals are these sounds. He called them puffs of air. In Latin, flatus voces.
In this time period, was Latin still spoken or only written?
Yeah, it's written. I mean, it was used in the church liturgy, so it was spoken to that extent. Flatus voces, like vocalizations. So, yeah, so they're just these sounds that that we produce. So they're very concrete, right? There's no element of abstractness to these things. If you update the view, it could also include inscribed symbols. So then instead of puffs of air, you'd have heaps of chalk. Or whatever. Puffs of air, heaps of chalk, or whatever this stuff is.
Ink?
Bits of marker.
Yeah. Heaps of ink. Heaps? No, it's not really heaps. More like blobs or something. Blobs of ink. Ink blobs. Right? Blobs of ink, heaps of graphite, etc. So that was really the first nominalistic view. And then there was this guy, philosopher, who founded the University of Paris, or at least the philosophy department there, and his name was Abelard. Abelard was a student of Rosselin. So he criticized this view of that universals are mere puffs of air. He argued that some of these puffs of air might not signify anything. They could just be like incoherent, meaningless ramblings, like about Jabberwockies and booze snangles and things like that. So he said, if a universal is just a puff of air, then why aren't those universals? Why isn't there a universal of boo jams? Right? since that's a puff of air, right? So the answer had to be that it's only universal if,
It's about something?
well, if it has a meaning.
Right.
If it's only meaningful puffs of air that, right? It's only meaningful puffs of air that have that would count as universals. Okay, but then what gives them meaning? Concepts or
So it
ideas.
just circles back to this concept.
So it started with nominalism. Started with this strict linguistic view of universals, and it evolved into conceptualism as the more viable form of it because of the problems of meaningless sounds. So does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so it's hard to sustain nominalism just in the purely linguistic form of, yeah, they're just these pure symbols. Yeah.
And so the strict form of nominalism, how does that get better? So the strict form of nominalism, like the reason it was unlikely, if it was, it's one that wasn't unlikely, is because it tried to establish meaning to all utterances.
Any sounds that come out of your mouth.
So like if you stub your toe and go,
Yeah.
then like, that means that there must be some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if you say some nonsense like slidey toes, boo jam jabberwockies, whatever, right? Then that's got to be represent all these universals too. So that seems wrong. Well, it seems like the thing to say. Yeah. So Abelard said they have to be meaningful sounds, and he then posited concepts as the things which give meaning to these utterances, which led to the conceptualist view. So conceptualism is sort of a more, a little more liberal form of nominalism. The reason it's still nominalistic is that these ideas in the mind are not themselves abstract essences. They're concrete occurrences inside minds, like events or something. They don't seem anything like abstract Platonic essences or even immanent forms because they're not in the things. So your idea of a dog is not something that's in the dog, let alone something that is outside of the world, which dogs partake of or reflect. So, yeah. Okay, shall we move on here? Just enough history of the. Yeah, I mean, there's more that could be said about this, but yeah. Others, there were also hybrid views developed. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas held the view that universals are in the mind. So that sounds like conceptualism, right? But have a basis in things. So what that basis is, right, would need to be teased out. It might be something like similarity, maybe, or something. He says universals are in the mind, which seems like a conceptualistic kind of view, but he brings in the Aristotelian perspective also by saying that there's some basis in the things as well for creating these concepts the way we do. So, yeah, dogness is our mentalistic creation, but it's based on the fact that all these creatures fall into a group somehow. Whereas cats don't fall in that group, they fall into a different group. And how exactly you define that group becomes the question. But maybe it has to do with the similarity somehow between, like all dogs are all more similar to each other than they are to cats, who are more similar to each other than they are to penguins, and so on. Yeah.
So how did that deal with the possibility of someone having thoughts that one would not think come from the outside? Like, for example, if someone was thinking, oh, I think this is a dog,
world or like a perceivable object. Like for example, someone were to have like, we're writing like a fantasy novel.
Like unicorns, you mean?
Yeah,
Dragons?
yeah.
Yeah.
So is it saying that even in those ideas there is something in the perceivable, like physical world that we're getting rid of?
Well, the conceptualists could say that we do have those, that there are those universals. They can say that. The conceptualist can. The Aristotelian wouldn't, because if the thing doesn't exist, the universal is not immanent in anything, right? The Platonist would say that they can exist because they could be those things. What Aquinas would say is not so clear, because he's kind of blending conceptualism and some kind of basis in things as well. So it seems like if they have to have a basis in things, then they wouldn't really be universals. They would just be like imaginary concepts. If you require that that has a basis in things. So, yeah. Okay, so. So this is a thumbnail sketch of universals. History. Okay, so certain arguments were put forward in order to say that conceptualism and nominalism are wrong. Okay, so let's look at some of those. So these here are arguments that could be put forward by some kind of Aristotelian. Yeah.
The Abelard you had up there, that Bronson showed, that wasn't Peter Abelard, was it?
Yeah.
It was Peter Abelard.
He was the guy who got into trouble with Eloise and everything.
Yeah, I'll figure it.
Yeah, he became like he was sort of one of the first like rock stars of philosophy, and
Castrated.
well, yeah, he got like castrated because he was messing around with Eloise, and her family. Then he wrote a book later about his trials and tribulations. Okay, so there are three arguments that could be put for initially that sort of hang together. So there are many arguments in favor of realism, but three sort of form a natural family, and these are known as the formal cause argument. And you may know that Aristotle had 4 causes. Anyone know what those are?
Yeah, efficient, formal.
The efficient cause, the formal cause, right?
Material cause and final cause.
Yeah. Material cause, final cause, efficient cause, and formal cause. Anyone not know what those are? Everyone does know what they are?
Can we go over them?
Yeah, really? Okay.
Big cookies with 4 causes.
You did what?
With Rosenfeld, remember it goes
Oh,
big
we make
cookies.
cookies with
Remember
them, right? Yeah.
the idea of the cookie, the ingredients of the cookie, the purpose of the cookie.
Right.
Yeah, so like a formal cause is an explanation based on the essence or nature of a thing.
Okay.
So like there's a shadow. There's a shadow of a hand on the wall. Why? Because, right?
There's a hand.
Because there's a light source and a hand, and the hand is between the light source and the wall. That's why. And that's due to the essence of what a shadow is, which is that it's a deprivation of light caused by an interposed object. Right? Yeah. That's the formal cause. The efficient cause is a cause that creates something through some kind of change. So a fire is caused in that sense by the striking of a match. Right.
Right, yeah. Okay, so that's the efficient.
Yeah, or a statue is created by the sculpting of the sculptor. The sculptor is the efficient cause of the sculpture, which is the more Aristotelian kind of example. But it seems to apply to the match and the fire, too. Okay. Material cause is like the matter of the thing is the cause. So like, why is this table hard? Because it's made of something like wood or formica, rather than made out of foam rubber. So if the table were made of foam rubber, then we'd explain why the table's soft, because it's made of foam rubber. If the table's hard, we can say it's hard because it's made out of formica. And then the final cause has to do with the thing's function or purpose. So like, why do giraffes have long necks? Because it helps them
Eat leaves.
eat the leaves high up on the branches of the trees. God made them that way. So. Could reach those leaves. Or nature selected their attributes according to their needs, survival needs, and they wound up having long necks for that reason.
Can you close the door? Thank you so much. It's okay.
Yeah, so those were the four causes. The one that's operative here is the formal cause, okay? Okay, so the argument says in premise one that Rover is a dog. Fido is a dog. Spot is a dog, etc. So that's premise one. That seems hard to dispute, right? Unless you're an utter skeptic who doesn't accept anything. We can put them aside, right? Okay, premise two says there must be something about Rover, Fido, Spot, etc., which accounts for all of them being dogs. So it's saying there must be an explanation. It can't just be a brutal fact of the universe that these things are all dogs and like other things just simply aren't, like pencils and beer bottles and chairs. There's got to be something about the beer bottles and the chairs and the pencils, right? Such that those things lack something that Rover, Fido, and Spot have.
Dogmas,
Well, maybe.
maybe.
Something, right?
Necessary property.
Something, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be something. This is all this argument saying there got to be something. And premise three says the best account is that, right? Is that Rover, Fido, Spot, etc. Share a quality in common. Namely, dogness. Therefore, 4, probably dogness does exist. Yeah, so that's the formal cause argument. So this leads us to realism, to a belief in at least moderate realism. This argument. So if we grant premise 1, which premise 1 is acceptable even to nominalists, that Rover, Fido, and Spot are dogs. Premise 2 says there's got to be something about them which accounts for them all being dogs. It seems wrong to suppose that that could just be a brute fact that has no explanation, just an ultimate fact of the universe, that there are dogs, and that they're different than cats and tables, and there's nothing about the more that can be said about it. That doesn't seem right. Does it? No. Yeah, so we get the 3, that the best account is that Rover, Fido, and Spot share a quality in common, namely dogness. So the idea is if Rover has dogness, that means he's a dog. If Fido has dogness, that means he's a dog. If Spot has dogness, that means he's a dog, so that would make them all dogs. So that's how the explanation would go. So the question is, can we come up with some better alternative explanation that doesn't involve abstract